This presentation is both about inspections and also some problems and solutions out on various projects. As noted in our Wahoo permit, we're required to do independent inspections of construction projects at least monthly. Now, there are some criteria in there to reduce the frequency of inspection to quarterly, and I'll go through those in a moment. Some projects may never ever get to quarterly inspection. Most often it's because of the size of the project. For example, out at Kapolei, that is a huge project. It spans both sides of the highway. When you walk around that entire project, you can bet your bottom dollar there's going to be at least 3 minor little things that you can find. Some projects have a lot of multiple sites. And every time you open up a new site, it starts the clock running again, so we may never ever get to quarterly. Or the project is so complex or environmentally sensitive. These are the criteria for reducing inspection. Basically, less than 6 minor deficiencies in a 3-month period, no major, no critical, and no month where there's 3 minor deficiencies. If that happens, we can go to quarterly. However, if before the next quarterly inspection a new site is opened or a new major element of construction is started, it will get inspected and the clock starts over again. If during any one of those quarterly inspections I find 3 minor deficiencies, a major or critical, it reverts back to monthly and we start again. These are the types of critical or the types of deficiencies we have. You hope you never get a critical on your project site. If you do, you have to correct it by the end of the day. It does not wait till the next day, even if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They have to be corrected that day. And sometimes these get a little complex. Say, for example, you discharge sediment into an inlet. Not only do you have to clean the inlet box, you have to trace that inlet out to the discharge point and make sure everything in between is cleaned. Major deficiencies and minor deficiencies need to be corrected as soon as possible, no later than 5 calendar days, and before the next major rain event. Note it says calendar days. That includes weekends. That includes holidays. And some people are saying, why do you come to my project on Wednesday? It's a negotiation process, how I schedule inspections. And just remember, there are only so many Mondays in a month. Some general facts. BMPs must be installed per SWIP prior to any element of construction. That includes installing the water lines for the irrigation system. That is an element of construction. DOT must inspect all the BMPs prior to any work beginning and produce a pre-construction inspection report. Excuse me. If you're going to phase your BMP installation, it must be included in your SWIP. And this does not mean refer to the construction schedule. BMPs must be installed per manufacturer specifications. You can use anything commercially available, provided it's appropriate to the situation. And it's involved per manufacturer specifications. This always happens when the camera's on. You have to provide a layered effect. Inlet protection is the last line of defense. It cannot be the only line. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Okay, you need to add or remove BMPs. You must, the only time you can add or remove BMPs without an approved amendment in place, if you need to do so to maintain compliance of the project. For example, you see water running in an area you did not anticipate, and you have to put in BMPs to control that water. That is permissible to go ahead, do the amendment, have that BMP in place while it's going through the approval process. If you're changing a type of BMP from one to the other, that's elective. You have to have an amendment already approved and signed in place before you do that. You want to remove it, it has to be in your SWIP when you can remove it, so you need an amendment. And DOT must approve the removal before it's removed. That's why I recommend building flexibility into the SWIP. How you're going to phase the BMPs. How you're going to, if there's a certain point where you're going to want to remove them. Say you have multiple sites. You can remove when the site is considered fully stabilized with the approval of the engineer. Build it in. List every BMP you can think of that you might want to use on that project. Put the cut sheets in the SWIP so you don't have to do an amendment every time you change a BMP. What's in the SWIP must be on the ground. DOH will come out, they will look at your SWIP, and they'll go around, and they will look for specific BMPs in specific areas. When I come out to do an inspection, I read the SWIP and all the permits. I meet with DOT project staff. It's up to the DOT to invite the contractor to join us on the inspection. I'm inspecting DOT, not the contractor. Check on-site documents. If it's the first inspection, I want to see the pre-construction inspection report. I walk the site, looking at BMP placement, the topography, that sort of thing. I take pictures of good and bad. And I operate for the project staff and the contractor on anything I find. That's when the clock starts, the day of the inspection. After that, you have 5 calendar days. I write up and transmit the inspection. Basically, any area that's been disturbed needs to be inspected. Areas that are being revegetated or stabilized also need to be inspected. Best time to inspect is when it's raining. This is a definition of disturbed area. Notice you got headquarters, parking areas. If you're parking the cars in the same spot every day, you kill the grass. That is disturbed area, and you become responsible for it. When any inspector comes to your site, have an inspection strategy. One of the first things you need to do is be upbeat. If an inspector walks on your site and you start complaining about, I don't have time for this, start rolling your eyes, they're going to be put off. You do not want to put off DOH folks. Be prepared for an inspection every day. You should be checking your BMPs, fixing them as they fall down. Have an inspection strategy. Where are you going to take them? How are you going to maneuver through the site? Are you going to have a backup crew ready to come fix anything they find that's a problem? Take pictures and notes, especially if it's DOH. Take the same picture that they take. When you fix it, take another picture, date, time stamp the picture, because whereas you get my report that day or the next day, DOH might be a week or more. Yeah, problems. Talk to the inspector. They cannot give you the solution. It's your project. They can give you ideas that might jump you off to another solution, how another project handled it. Be upfront and honest. Don't make excuses. Most excuses kind of don't go over well. Except I did hear an excuse that was never heard before, that was the best excuse I've heard. We couldn't fix that sill fence because the monk seal was sitting next to it. And they had a picture. Correct stuff as soon as possible. Document corrections, take a picture, date time stamped. Don't tell the inspector what you think they want to hear. DOH was out on a project and they commented on such a clean road. Somebody piped up, yeah, we wash it down in the morning and at the end of the day. Wrong thing to say. There was a lot of talking to get them out of a fine. And don't wait for the inspector to show up to find out if something's a problem. Own the problem, own the solution. You may be wrong, that's fine. But if you take action, you need to take action. Not wait for the inspector to show up. These are some of the references I use for inspections. One thing that you all need to read if you have a 404 on your project is the 404 permit. That has specific instructions unique to your project. For example, 2 bridges on the North Shore being constructed about the same time, a few miles apart. Turbidity barrier was to go in at the start of construction at one and stay in till completed, at the other only at a certain point in construction. IA stream. They were required to put specific BMPs in a specific order, because as they put in, some of the others had to come out. We're going to talk about a couple of these things. I'm not going to cover very much on inlets and drains because that's being covered in another presentation, and the same with slopes. The bottom line, perimeter protection, your project must have it. Sediment cannot leave the site. If your project on the roadway goes from point A to point B, you also need to look beyond the project limits. You're responsible for anything that gets out and down. For instance, if your road slopes and there's a drain 25 feet from your end of project site, you are still required to put protection in for that inlet. Not everything makes good perimeter control, and it has to be installed per manufacturer's spec. What I'm holding up there is something somebody used for perimeter control. It wasn't a DOT project, otherwise I would have had a few more things to say about it. My fingers are not that strong. This was strong. Totally installed wrong, very light. You could kick it and move it a foot. So it's definitely not as heavy as a compost filter sock. And by the way, just as a side note, biosocks, the insulation on flat areas, you don't have to stake them. But bear in mind that biosocks and a lot of the other compost socks will float initially and move in a heavy rain before they become saturated and get heavy. Can't confuse stockpiles and spoil piles with perimeter control. They have to be separate. And it's also not just for wind, but it's, or rain, it's for wind also. Just about every pile is coverable. And you need to provide perimeter protection separate from the site perimeter. And if it's way too big, hydro mulch. This is what I'm talking about where it has to be separate. This is a spoil pile. This area slopes this way and slopes that way. They needed additional perimeter control around it. This pile over here is about twice the size as what you see in the photo. I can't get up high enough to take the entire project photo. It's coverable. This one in front here, that is definitely coverable. This one up here, obviously that's a little bit big. So what they did is hydro mulch it with tactifier. As I mentioned, inlet protection is your last line of defense. You have to have layers of protection on your site. Remember, in heavy rain, sometimes we instruct projects to pull inlet protection on the road to prevent flooding. That doesn't give you the right to dump sediment into those drains. If you do, you have created a discharge, and if I'm out there, it becomes a critical deficiency, regardless of whether you were instructed to pull that inlet protection or not. This one was on the interior of a project, so it was not pulled. There is nothing that you can see up gradient, and all that came down and ended up on the inlet protection. They needed other stuff upslope of that. Once they put some check dams in on that, you can see where it's starting to collect the soil from that inlet. If that had been on the road, we would have had a critical deficiency and a very big discharge. Concrete. When you talk about requirements for concrete, you're talking about anything that contains cement. If you think about all the different types of things out there, you can talk about regular concrete, grout, CTB, all kinds of stuff. What makes them a pollutant is the cement product. Asphalt, I'm talking about when I use the word asphalt, I'm talking about both asphalt and cold plate material, petroleum-based products. Both of these are never stored on the bare ground. For concrete, you have both commercial and you have contractor constructed washouts. Assume they all leak. This is a commercial washout. Contractor pays a lot of money to rent those things, and they're supposed to be foamed against leakage. This thing was leaking into the gutter area here. There's a drain down there. That gutter area is part of the MS4 system. That you can't pollute into that. Kiddie pools usually only last about one use because of the caustic nature of concrete. You can extend their life by throwing a hunk of plastic in there. But once they're used, they will leak. This one is a contractor constructed box. It was heavily leaking, but it was not sited because they have the secondary containment underneath. And this is one reason why I recommend that whenever you have a concrete washout, whether it be the commercial or not, spread out a hunk of plastic. Just take the roll and kick it down. Berm it with something underneath the plastic, 2x4s, biosocks, rocks, whatever, to create a secondary pool. That way, if it does leak, it leaks into the secondary containment, makes cleanup easier. You don't have to deal with cleanup that I cite you for. And also catch the dribbles from the concrete guy that comes, because they always send one that can't aim. You're cleaning out your concrete washout and you have moist concrete waste. That too must be should not be on the ground. Easy thing to do is spread out some plastic, put it on that. If it's still kind of really wet, burn the plastic. And this one, they kind of got it the opposite way. They got the bare concrete on the ground and covered it with plastic. I peek under plastic, folks. Asphalt and cold patch. Neither one should be on the bare ground. Yes, I know more oil will probably wash off the roadway in the first rain than come off these two piles. What this whole program is to do is minimize pollution. You can place it on the roadway for progress. You cannot put it beside it. The way you store either one of those is on an impervious material, cover it, and put perimeter control around it. This has the plastic underneath. Usually for cold patch, I kind of recommend you put on steel plates. That way when the guy comes to scoop it up, he doesn't get a scoop full of plastic. But it's your choice. Purpose is not to come in contact with the rainwater and have the oil wash off of it. Hazardous materials. This includes your containers of hazardous material. It also includes galvanized steel, rebar, and creosote poles. When they're stored together, they create a point source of pollution from the rust, the corrosion, or the creosote. All containers are required to be labeled. This is not just so we know what it is, it's also, you know, the global harmonizing system has come type thing. If you're going to recycle a container, relabel it. I was on the Big Island and watching a drill rig, and I went over to him and I said, why do you have that big container of peroxide sitting there? Side of the road, peroxide. That's what your thing says. You know, one of those big containers with the grid around it. You need to put it in containment, and if it's a metal container, cover it. Per Appendix C, building materials need to be stored in such a way as not come in contact with rainwater. And they recommend either cover with plastic or a temporary roof. In this particular case, all that, oops, wrong way. All this, am I on? I guess it's not going to show. The rebar is on dunnage and it's under the viaduct. Secondary containment. Contractors can, there's nothing that says a contractor can't build their own containment. Okay, that containment needs to be able to contain whatever's in there. This up here, they put the plastic under the biosock and set over top the biosock. If that plastic comes loose, like it is here, it just runs off. Here, this one's okay, except I recommend covering it because the bottom fills up with water. If you have a leak, you have to treat that water as contaminated. There are a lot of different types of pallet systems out there, some of them with self-rising floats. If you use one with a self-rising float, make sure they don't put something on the float. Two cases, either wrong label. This was a hazardous material label. It had water in it. DOH is not going to look in the container. They're just going to say you got hazardous material not in containment. Over here, we don't know what it is. And writing on the Sharpie what it is not a good idea. You need to have the proper hazardous material label on there. Track out control. You got your, it's required anytime you go from dirt to asphalt or concrete road. And there are a lot of different varieties. This is a geoterra grid that some of the companies have been using. It's pretty easy. Spread the fabric out, put the geoterra mat on it, bolt it together, and you're good to go. When it becomes heavily impacted with mud, it's got to be taken apart and cleaned. There are also various methods of track out plates that are available on the market. Again, whenever they become impacted with dirt, they need to be cleaned. Any questions?